assessments use measurement, but if we think about assessment in a context of accountability, whether it's formal accountability or informal accountability, assessments are also transactions. And when you think about a transaction, the first thing that comes to mind is you want the transaction to be fair. It's fairness, it takes precedence over measurement concerns like reliability and accuracy and sensitivity. And so the way you achieve fairness in a transaction is, number one, through transparency. To the extent that secrecy is involved, and it will have to be involved, you don't want the students or the teachers seeing the questions ahead of time. It kind of, if too much is done in the name of secrecy, it hurts the transparency and the belief in the fairness of the transaction. So one of the pitfalls is to focus too much on measurement without paying attention to the transaction side of accountability. Is it fair? So people who take the tests, the schools, the teachers, and the students, the more they know about what's going to be on the tests, the kinds of questions, how they're going to be scored, what the focus will be, all of those things contribute to the sense of fairness and the belief in the legitimacy of the assessment. The more mysterious it is, the less the faith will be in the system. There's also an issue of the alignment of what students do during class time when they're doing their regular work. What are the students doing in class? What kinds of assignments are they getting? What are they producing? And how similar is that to what they have to produce when they take the assessment? If what they produce when they take the assessment looks like it came from another planet than what they do while they're in class, there's a difficulty there in terms of fairness, both perceived and real. So the assessment should, to the extent that it's practical, and it is very constrained, try to echo what the BNCC says should be going on in the classroom. There should be recognizable parallels. The biggest pitfalls come from the necessity for oversimplifying the curriculum on an assessment because of the short amount of time, because it's large scale. And so that oversimplification is the main source of danger, and we have to be on guard the whole time. And so we're going to have to make trade-offs, we're going to have to give in to constraints and so on. We have to do them very judiciously and move away from the BNC very reluctantly. That's the major pitfall. Are the conditions and circumstances of administration the same from school to school and state to state? So, for example, is the test timed? You could have a time limit on the test. Students have exactly 90 minutes to take the test. But is that 90 minutes enforced the same from state to state? Or you can, as the US has moved towards untimed tests, so the tests are no longer timed, that actually has improved things. It turns out things are more fair if they're not timed. So students can continue working on it. If the test takes the average student 90 minutes, then you give the students maybe 150 minutes, so they have plenty of time. You don't want time to be a factor, because what you wind up measuring if time is too much of a factor is how fast students are. Not how much they understand, not how much they've learned, but just their innate speed. And again, this is not something the schools are giving them. That's something they bring to school. So speed, we don't want speed to be a factor. The way you eliminate it is by giving students plenty of time. And then there's the issue of accommodations. We want the test to be a level playing field, but kids are different. So what about kids with eyesight problems? They might even be blind. Do they take the test? Well, yes, they can take the test. There can be a Braille version. And some of the items might involve visual diagrams which don't translate. Is there a comparable item, a similar item that can be constructed for the hard of seeing? There are students who have been diagnosed with attention disorders. What kind of a combination is appropriate for them? Is there a large print version? Students will have different home languages. Is the test available in different languages? Are there accommodations for that? There are students with dyslexia. What kind of accommodations are there for that? And as much as possible, the accommodations that are available for students during instruction should have some sort of analogous accommodation during administration. Is the test going to be administered digitally? Is it going to be done on screens rather than on paper? If it is, that raises another set of comparability issues. So for example, if it is going to be on screens, what kind of screens? So initially it was thought in the US that everybody should use the same kind of computer. And this led to the very impractical problem of having buses full of computers driving from school to school so the kids could use the same ones. And that's been abandoned in favor of the kids use whatever computer or pad they've been using in the school, which creates the problem of compatibility of the devices to the state test. But that turned out not to be a difficult problem. So now most tests are administered digitally on a device that's familiar to the student. And the tests are administered online, which raises another issue. Are the schools connected to the internet? But they were done online for security purposes. Some kids will have familiarity with working digitally, and some will have much less. So for the students who have less, they'll make mistakes in just interacting with the device and the interface. And it will take them longer to learn how to do that. And they'll need practice before they take the test. Is accommodation made for that? So it's sort of built in. A lot of the states will have decided these issues for their state test. And to the extent that the way the state decided it is the same as the national test, then the students will be in a familiar experience when they take the test. To the extent the state test and the national test are different, then you're going to introduce some errors on the part of students because they'll be assuming it's the same as the state. So that's one of the areas where it should be the easiest for this national test to lead the way and convene the state assessment people and come to some common agreement so there's similarity in the student experience while they're taking the test, at least in the digital form. If some students take it on paper and some students take it digitally, what research we have indicates that it's not so easy to make them comparable. It's not the same test if you put it on paper or digital. The kind of intellectual response, the brain response, everything is different. So it may be you want to have a plan where you start on paper and over a 5-year period move to digital, and you have a planned transition. One of the some of the pitfalls that come from measurement is people will want to compare. Think about the comparisons people will want to make. local schools, teachers, states, the national political process. So for the national assessment, one of the most important comparisons is how are we doing this year compared to last year and the year before? What are the implications for the test design if we want the test to be measuring the same thing year after year? And so you have to make tests that are parallel from year to year, and you have to build in equating. And there are a number, we understand a lot about this, and we have to listen to our measurement experts about it. But typically what it means is every student who's taking this year's test is also taking a few items from next year's test and maybe a few items from last year's test. And so you have actual data from the same students on items from 3 years. And in this way, you can statistically link the years and make the little adjustments that are needed in the scores. Because you could say, I've looked at these 2 items and they're the same in difficulty, but in practice, they won't be. You can't just assume you would recognize the sources of difficulty. So you need data. So the trend comparison is important. Suppose you're preserving trend, which becomes part of the agenda, but you realize there's a serious flaw in the test that you want to fix. When you fix that flaw, that's going to break the trend because the repaired test won't be the same as the broken test. And so you have to have a way of estimating the comparability of the two. And if you plan ahead, again, there are ways of doing that. Suppose there are changes at some point, the BNCC will change, because that just always will happen. And at that point, the test should change. And again, if you plan ahead, you can link the scores so you don't have complete loss of comparability. Although sometimes you'll have to break trend if the change is big enough. If you look at the study of trend in NAEP, National Assessment of Educational Progress, that's the US national test, measuring trend has been their highest priority. So they've done study after study for the last 30 years. And if you go to that website, most questions about trend will probably have been studied there. So as things come up related to trend, I recommend that resource. Okay, so what other comparisons will people make? Well, they're going to compare my state to your state. And what makes those scores comparable? What makes them comparable is that the administrations were similar. If my state is improving and your state is staying the same, but your state is higher than me, but I'm gaining on you, that's going to make us happy. There's also going to be comparisons in social groups, ethnic groups. Are boys and girls performing equally well? Students who are from poor homes doing as well as from rich homes? Whatever subpopulations become interesting for whatever reason, those comparisons will be made. And so you'll want that, again, to make sure that you're making them comparable.